But anyway, so the Daniel 3 is where I think we got into it a little bit, but we didn't get too much in depth into it, unfortunately, which is Nebuchadnezzar builds a golden statue. And we need to understand he does this and he wants people to worship it, but we need to understand the significance, which I believe I mentioned to you guys, about the statue made entirely of gold. We get that he wants to have people worship, bow down to him in the form of the statue. Why does he build it entirely of gold? Besides that gold is, he wants to look cool. Yeah.
Because it's expensive, and it's like people see it as like somebody powerful when they have it.
That's true, but there's a broader significance. Yeah.
Because it doesn't decay.
No, that's true too. But I mean, that's there's a point that Nebuchadnezzar is trying to make. Remember the vision. It connects with the vision of Daniel chapter 2. Okay, so remember the statue in Daniel chapter 2. And now what is Nebuchadnezzar trying to do in opposition to that vision? So, yes?
Because it said, like, in his dream, the statue wasn't completely gold, but this statue is completely gold.
Yes. And so what Nebuchadnezzar is getting at is that in the statue dream, Daniel tells him in Daniel 2:38, you are the head of gold. But after you, there's going to come another kingdom that's inferior to you, but it is going to overpower Babylon, and it will be the next dominant kingdom. And then after that, there's going to be another kingdom, and there's going to be kingdoms after that. So he tells him, your kingdom is temporary, it's not going to last, and you as king are not going to last forever. And so Nebuchadnezzar tries to undo the vision by making a gold statue and saying, no, I'm gold all the way down. I will make my kingdom last forever. I will oppose what Daniel's God has said, and I will overcome the vision of Daniel chapter 2. Everyone will worship my golden image. If they don't, I will throw them into this fiery furnace. Okay, so that's what's going on. Daniel, during this time, is probably out of town. He's probably sent on a different mission. And these officials, including Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, are here required to bow down when they hear the music. Okay, so during this time, now there's something that we need to make note of, because this language is going to be phrasing that's important throughout Daniel, especially as we get to Daniel chapter 7, which I said is the center, most important chapter. Okay, can somebody read Daniel 3:4? Yeah, Eli?
Then the herald loudly proclaimed, to you the command is given, O peoples, nations, and men of every language. Okay, so he's going to say that when the music plays, you bow down before the statue. But what we need to make note of is that the phrase that comes up a lot is all peoples, nations, and languages. Okay, this is the type of praise, honor, and worship that the kings in Daniel try to receive. They hear Nebuchadnezzar, the next king in Daniel 5, Belshazzar, and then Darius or Cyrus tries to get all the people, tribe, nation, and language to pray only to him for a month, and Daniel does not. Okay, so this is the type of honor that the kings are trying to get, that they rule over all people, nations, and languages. That will be important. Just make note of this phrasing in Daniel 3:4. It will also come up in Daniel 6. That will be important for when you get to Daniel 7. Okay, because so that language will reappear. Okay, so they're told, and by the way, something kind of funny, but it's also just kind of dumb. There's a ton of evidence that Daniel wrote Daniel, that it was written during the time period it was written, but people reject it because it has very precise predictive prophecy, particularly about the Greek period. So they're like, Daniel must have been written in the 160s BC, like 160 years before Jesus, because it's so accurate about the Greek period. It talks about Alexander the Great, and then after him splitting into 4 kingdoms. How could Daniel have known that? Well, if you presuppose, it's the Bible's the Word of God, it's God's saying what He's decreed for history. But others are like, no, that can't be the case. And so they try to say Daniel was written during the Greek period, even though Daniel's a Hebrew and Aramaic book. But their case that they try to make that Daniel was written late is based on like 3 Greek words that show up in Daniel. And they're like, see, it's from the later Greek period. They couldn't have known these Greek words. And they're here in Daniel 3:5, and they're just Greek words for musical instruments that were probably traded and known all over the Babylonian and the Medo-Persian and the Greek Empire. So when they say, oh, well, modern, scholarship believes that Daniel was written late, it's not for good reasons. It's not for good historical reasons. It's for pretty superficial reasons when you actually look at their so-called evidence, that they're like, some of the instruments mentioned in Daniel 3:5 have Greek names that are borrowed words from Greek. Yeah.
And also, if it was written later, how would like any of the historical Babylonian Empire context even make sense?
Right, and so there's things that they say Daniel was they made it up that somebody there in the Greek period wrote it as if he was Daniel and all that stuff. But Daniel provides us pretty specific information that you'd only know if you lived during the time of the Babylonian Empire. It's not as easy to make a forgery as people think. Sometimes people think that it's like, if you guys have been studying Shakespeare wrote 500 years ago. You could try, even if you were an expert in Shakespeare, you could try to imitate Shakespeare and say, oh, I found this ancient play from 500 years ago from Shakespeare that nobody ever knew about. But you could not, and I could not, imitate that language. And experts could not imitate that language. It would be evident. It's the same thing with Moses, same thing with Job. They write in this language that's ancient, and Daniel writes during the Babylonian period. So there's plenty of evidence to believe Daniel's written early, but I just made a note of that because it's just to show you guys that when people make those arguments against the Bible being God's word or being written during the time period it says it was written, their evidence is dumb. It's superficial. And so you don't need to be intimidated if you ever come across those types of arguments because they rest on very flimsy claims. So someone like me who's studied this out a little bit, it's I come back to the conclusion where it's it's okay. So that's not anything that they say it is, and they have nothing to offer. And Daniel wrote Daniel. That's what Jesus believed. It says in Matthew 24, etc. So anyway, just so you guys know about that. But okay, so back to the account of what's going on here. So we know that they're threatened with going into the fiery furnace. Okay, and so Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego don't bow down. They're the only ones that don't bow down of this group. Okay, and there may have been other Jews there that did bow down. Okay, so it doesn't mean that they're the only Jews from the exiles of Judah. Okay, and so people bring up charges against them to Nebuchadnezzar. They're saying these 3 Jews didn't bow down to the statue, and so he's furious. But he has a conversation with them because he does find them useful. He does have a respect for them. But I want us to note another word that is important here that needs to be in our minds for later in Daniel, and that's the word serve, connected with its synonym word worship. Okay, so the word serve is often alongside, in this Aramaic sense, the word worship. Okay, so I just want us to pick up on that pattern because it will be important for Daniel 7:14 to understand what's going on with this wording. Okay, but they say this is their charge that they tell Nebuchadnezzar about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. In Daniel 3:12, they say there are certain Jews whom you have appointed over the administration of the province of Babylon, namely Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have disregarded you. They do not serve your gods or worship the golden image which you have set up. So notice serve and worship go together. So this is the charge. It says in 13, Nebuchadnezzar was in rage and anger and said to bring them forward and asks them if it's true. He says in 3:14, is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image which I have set up? And then he threatens them, says, I'll give you another chance to do this, to fall down and worship the image that I have made. And he says, okay, what's your answer? And can somebody read for their answer? This is a great statement here, particularly, I think, verse 18. But can somebody read 3:16 through 18? Yeah, Patrick.
Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If this be so, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. Okay,
so it says here, we don't need to give you an answer. It says, our God whom we serve, worship, is able to deliver. But then he says, they say in 3:18, but even if God doesn't intervene in a special way to save us out of these circumstances, we still will not bow down to the statue. Right? So they will risk death. They will choose and prefer death to being disloyal to God by committing idolatry. And so Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego represent for Israel, for the people during this time, that it's more important to obey God, be loyal to him, than even life. Then it's even if you're going to die, it's still better to die being loyal to God, even if God doesn't owe it to you to save you out of these circumstances, right? And that's going to be key as well, because Daniel has a theology of resurrection. So we'll talk about in Daniel 7, it'll be implied in Daniel 9 and in Daniel 12, that God is able, even if you die for faithfulness to God, God will resurrect. Especially in Daniel 12:2, it says that specifically, that there will be a resurrection of the righteous and a resurrection of the wicked to condemnation. And so God is able to overcome death in this sense, right? So they have that trust in God. So Nebuchadnezzar is obviously furious about this, has the furnace heated up 7 times hotter than usual, and has them put more clothes on and throws them into the furnace. And the guys who tied them up and threw them in, they die as they throw them into the furnace because the heat is so intense. So they fall into the fire. And so Nebuchadnezzar now asks a question. As he's watching them in there, he sees something strange, out of the ordinary. Okay, can somebody read Daniel 3:24? Daniel 3:24. Yeah, Vivian.
Then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished and rose up in haste. He declared to his counselors, did we not cast 3 men bound into the fire? They answered and said to the king, true, O king.
Yeah, so he says, wait a second. Didn't I only tell you guys to throw in 3 guys? And so he says 3. The problem is he sees 4. Vivian, could you read 3:25 as well?
He answered and said, but I see 4 men unbound, walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt, and the appearance of the fourth is like the Son of the gods.
Okay, so now they see 4 guys in there, but the appearance of the fourth is unique. So they're walking around in there. They're still alive, unharmed, as it seems, by the fire. And then in 325, they see this fourth one. And it says the appearance of the fourth is like a son of the gods. So there's a blazing, there's a blazing brightness to this fourth one. And so we get a little bit of a preview. Remember, Nebuchadnezzar knows that that his kingdom is going to come to an end from the stone. The stone is going to crush the statue, become a mountain, fill the whole earth, right? And the stone has messianic ideas in it, which we get from Psalm 118, we get from Isaiah 28, etc. And so this is kind of Nebuchadnezzar's preview of this is the one that's going to overcome your kingdom. This is the stone that's going to crush you, the statue. And so he sees this figure in there with them. This is arguably the Messiah there in pre-incarnate there with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, preserving them through the fire. Right? So he then calls them out of the fire. Nebuchadnezzar is amazed. 326 says he came near to the door of the furnace of blazing fire. He responded and said, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, come out, you servants of the Most High God, and come here. And so they came out of the midst of the fire. And then all of these people are gathered around. They see that there's no effect on their bodies. They're not burned. Their hair's not singed. They have no smell of smoke on them in 427. And then Nebuchadnezzar, listen how he responds. Now, this is not a total humbling, but it is an amazement here that he says in 427, Nebuchadnezzar responded and said, Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants who put their trust in him, violating the king's command, and yielded up their bodies so as not to serve or worship any god except their own. Okay, so we're seeing that serve and worship are synonyms, right? 429, he says, Therefore I make a decree that any nation or tongue that speaks anything offensive against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb from limb, their houses reduced to a rubbish heap, inasmuch as there is no other God who is able to deliver this way. Then the king caused Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to prosper in the province of Babylon.